Hello everyone, and you are watching Sharing Vietnam, a 15-minute talk show every day we bring to you at 8:30 p.m. on our international channel NetViet VTC10. The topic of our talk show today will be the efforts of Vietnam in order to eradicate the poverty in this country and the effort of a special organization. And let's say hello to the team leader of the Making Markets Work Better for the Poor, Mr. Boudica. Let's say hello to him. Hello, Mr. Boudica, and
Hello,
thank you for joining our talk show today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Mr. Boudica, can you share with us how long have you been working for this organization, and especially in this country, Vietnam?
Okay, the M4P project really started many years ago, but the current stage of the project, the second stage of the project, only started in 2009, and that is when I came to Vietnam. The project is financed by a number of international donors, such as the UK Department for International Development and the Asian Development Bank. And it's also supported by the Ministry of Planning and Investment here in Vietnam. So I came at the beginning of the second stage of this project. The second stage was much more about doing things with poor people.
So what do you think about the inequality of Vietnam?
I mean, inequality is quite an emotive word, you know. But I think, of course, we've seen in the last 10 years inequality increasing, and perhaps increasing quite rapidly. Of course, inequality for economic growth, and especially when you're talking about poor people, it's not the best thing that you could happen. But at the moment, some would argue that inequality is a function of, you know, how rapidly Vietnam has been growing. So I think it's one of those issues that need to be looked at very carefully in the next 10 years or so.
So what do you think about the efforts that Vietnam have had in order to tackle with and eradicate the poverty in Vietnam?
I mean, internationally, Vietnam is a star. Vietnam has performed almost, some would say, near miracles in terms of poverty eradication. 1980s, you know, the proportion of the population which was poor was 75%. Today, it's under 14%. That is a fantastic change, and one that rightly the government and Vietnamese people should be proud of. But I think the issue now with poverty is that all the easy wins in poverty have been made. Now we have very kind of difficult areas which are poor and remote, often very concentrated with ethnic minority people. And I think that requires much more lateral thinking in how we deal with poverty.
Thank Mr. Boudica for the very first sharing today. And here will be a clip to give you more information about the efforts of Vietnam on the poverty reduction.
For the past 2 decades, Vietnam has gained remarkable achievements in poverty reduction. The poverty rate in Vietnam has decreased from 58.1% in 1993 to 11.2% in 2009. By March 2012, up to 2.58 million households were poor and 1.53 million deemed near poor. International organizations have positively assessed poverty alleviation in Vietnam and said that Vietnam has the ability to achieve the targets of poverty reduction of the Millennium Development Goals of the United Nations before 2015. Such results are gained thanks to the effort of Vietnam as well as other localities in the implementation of action programs on poverty alleviation. Such National Target Program on Poverty Reduction from 2006 to 2010, Socio-Economic Development Program for Extremely Difficult Villages. In particular, the Program 135 Phase 2 is seen as a new level in the work of poverty alleviation in Vietnam, especially for those with special difficulties in mountainous and ethnic areas. In addition, the support and the assistance of international donors have played an important role in poverty reduction. Such programs include ODA projects from the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, JICA, UNDP, and UK Department of International Development, etc. has brought socio-economic efficiency, contributing greatly to poverty reduction in Vietnam.
So, Mr. Boudica, can you share with us about the role of M4P in order to assist Vietnam on its efforts to eradicate the poverty?
Yeah, I think M4P program is quite different from many government programs. M4P is trying to look at poverty from many dimensions. It's trying to understand it from a policy point of view. So looking at what can we do to improve policies in Vietnam that can help poor people. But at the same time, we're looking at the sector which is often neglected in Vietnam, and that's the private sector. And what can they do? And what can we do together to align their interests to help the poor people? Not out of charity, but because it is something that is good for their business.
So in the past 3 years, how many projects that the VCF have been implemented in Vietnam?
We started off with 11 projects, but as I said at the beginning, the projects are high-risk projects, so we don't expect every project to finish. Out of the 11, 7 finished and concluded very well.
So can you share with us about what are the differences between the way that VCF approach to the farmers in comparison with the poverty reduction program run by the government of Vietnam?
I think they're different and complementary. I think the programs that the government is running in Vietnam is very interesting in terms of trying to really target the poor ethnic groups. What we're trying to do is trying to run with private sector organizations and trying to really focus on them to say, well, you're an agribusiness, you may be in Quang Tri province growing cassava, but how are you going to incorporate the poor people more into your business? Because you're dependent on them and they're dependent on you. So how do we do that? How do we make it better? How do we benefit the poor people and also benefit the company? And so we're always trying to look at new ways of doing that. So we're not trying to look at the same ways of doing development. It's a completely new way of doing development. But because we're looking at innovation, it's high risk. And so we want companies to take some risk.
So at this moment, Vietnam is doing a program to connect the 4 different units. We can say the state, entrepreneurs, scientists, and the farmers in encouraging the consumption of agricultural products and goods for the farmer. But actually, we have to admit that some mistake that happen. What has VCF done in order to improve the situation?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. I think in terms of the Vietnam Challenge Fund, we've tried to take a different approach. We've tried to make an approach where those 4 institutions work work naturally together. We're not trying to force a situation. So let me give you an example of what we mean by that. So for instance, we have a tea project in Ha Giang. And it's Shan Tuet tea, which is ancient tea, and it's grown by very poor ethnic minority communities. The problem there is that the tea branches are old and not well looked after, and at the same time the community is very far from the tea factory, and so they get very poor prices. So what we did was we worked with the Tea Research Institute, we worked with scientists, we also work with the government extension system, and we work with the company. And in that way, what we have done is improve the livelihoods and incomes of around about 1,000 people and given jobs to many hundreds. So it's kind of interesting when it's a natural progression. I think if you try and force people to work together, it becomes much more complicated.
Thank you so much for those sharing. And here will be another clip. We prepare to give you more information about the assistance of Vietnam Challenge Fund or M4P for the reduction on poverty of Vietnam.
Vietnam Challenge Fund, a new financial instrument funding for innovative business projects to deliver direct profits to the poor, was launched in 2009 with the project M4P Phase 2, including some sectors in fruits, aquatic products, cassavas, coffee, mushrooms, tea, beef has brought significant results. The typical projects such as mushroom cultivation technology for poverty reduction, organic tea in the ethnic minority, beef that can be traced the origins of the Hmong people, production of fertilizers from waste products of refined cassava, wet Robusta coffee, grapefruit and seafood supply chain for international supermarkets have been financed $3.71 million, in which the Challenge Fund contributed $1.26 million and the participating enterprises with $2.45 million. 7 creative projects of Vietnam Challenge Fund has enabled the rural market in Vietnam to perform better and become more fair to the poor market participants. After a period of operation, the project has helped 16,900 people increase income and more than 2,100 jobs were created. The indirect effects are expected to be even greater when the new successful models are replicated.
So, Mr. Boudica, what are the most difficult thing that VCF met in Vietnam when you implement all 11 projects?
I think the most difficult, I think, I think they fall into about 3 categories. I think one is, how do you coordinate so many farmers? You know, one of the advantages and disadvantages of Vietnamese agriculture is that it is so fragmented. So how do you get 1,000 farmers together in a cost-effective way is very difficult for businesses. I think the other issues we have are probably more to do with how do you manage climate risk, climate change, and also how do you manage branding and accessing high-value international markets.
So, Mr. Boudica, when we talk about the efforts on poverty reduction, we always talk about money and budgets. So can you share with us about the factors contributed to the success of 11 projects from VCF in Vietnam without using a great budget?
Yeah, I think in a way we were lucky because we work with companies, and companies have to at least give 51% of the value of the project as their own contribution. Because in the end, if it's successful, they should make money and make a return. So in a way, we had to put much less money in than you usually have to. But in a way, I think also one of the things is that it's not often about money. It's about ideas. And the Challenge Fund is all about trying to flesh out and deepen someone's understanding of those ideas. And so what we had was we have a great many businesses in Vietnam who are very interested in promoting very good ideas. And so it's very easy for us to finance those kinds of ideas. But it's much more difficult to translate them into tangible projects. So we have to work with basically businesses to understand the poor people, because businesses don't usually understand that. They understand their markets very well. So that kind of, in a way, helps us to one less thing to worry about.
So you have just shared in the last part of the program that 7 projects from VCF have been implemented successfully in Vietnam. What about the other? Can you reveal a future plan of VCF in Vietnam?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I mean, out of those 7 projects, we've had quite a good return. I mean, in terms of, we've impacted on 18,000 people, meaning that they have moved away from poverty. And we created about 2,200 jobs, new jobs. But the idea was always that the Vietnam Challenge Fund will try and demonstrate to people what you can do in Vietnam, what is possible. And I'm very pleased to note that there are many donors now who are wishing to copy this approach and trying to do this in a broader scale.
Once again, thank you so much, Mr. Boudica, for taking your time and joining our talk show today. And on behalf of Sharing Vietnam, we wish VCF great success in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your watching today, and I hope that you enjoyed the program as I did. Send us an email at sharingvietnam@gmail.com if you have question or recommendation. Thank you so much and see you next time.